Okay, today I want to show you how easy it is to actually get a side project done, at least a smaller one, by using Supabase, Next.js, and Tailwind. And I'm not yet the biggest Tailwind fan, such that I haven't really used it. I know slightly a few things, but that's it. So we're going to have a look at how to install Tailwind into Next.js and how to use Supabase as part of Next.js then, and what specifically are we going to build. Let's switch to the browser. I've already created a repository called Gary.rest, and it will be kind of copying Kani.rest. So I've seen that one when I was watching a video from John Mayers from Supabase, so not Your Body is a Wonderland, John Mayers. I mean, the service is really fun, but it not all of the quotes came off good in all of the contexts. I say like that. So I thought, why not have a API for motivational quotes from Gary Vee? So I registered Gary Vee. I registered Gary.rest, and here we go. And this is what we're going to build. So let's switch to the editor. First things first, open up your terminal. Sure thing. And once that's done, the second thing you want to do is call npx create next step and wait until the setup is has run through. That can take a few seconds usually, and yeah. All right, when that's done, you call git add and git commit to just say cool stuff added and push it. And then if you refresh your Git repository, obviously the new file is gonna be there, but the interesting part is deploying it already. So we open up vercel.com/new to be able to create a new project, and we import the project from GitHub. And then we simply click on deploy and we'll wait. But as long as that's deploying, we will be running npm run dev on our local machine such that it will open up a development version on localhost 3000, which will simply show like this. So welcome to Next.js and so on and so forth. But we want to delete all of that. So we go to the index file and just simply say empty everything and export default function home. And then first of all, return hey. That should do it for the beginning. Also, what we can remove already is the unused style and the styles within the global CSS. Yep. All right. So the next thing we want to do is prepare the installation for Tailwind such that we can use styles. So we switch over to the browser and check what Tailwind says when it comes to installation. So let's check. I can use the quick search and go find install Tailwind with Next.js. And then it says I need to use npm install Tailwind CSS and so on and so forth. So I head over to the terminal, and then within the terminal, I killed the running development server, and I will be running the npm install command. Also, what Tailwind says in the documentation is once that's done, we will be calling npx tailwind css init. So I'm copying that one over as well, which will create a few files from Tailwind. And last but not least, we need to add the paths to the pages or components that we are using as Tailwind says. So you need to open up the Tailwind config.js. And since we only have pages, we only add the pages path. Yep. And oh, there wasn't even a last one to do. There's one more thing to do, which is using these at tailwind whatever statements and put them to globals CSS. Save it, and now it says you can finally run npm run dev. So let's try that. And then switch over to our localhost 3000. Yeah, that's running fine. We don't have any styles yet, so we want to change that. But first of all, we want to add some markup. And how's that markup gonna look like? Well, let's have a look at Kane.rest. Kane.rest is having basically a headline, it is having a subline, then it is having a link and basically a box with a random quote. And this is what we're going to build as well. So let's first of all make sure that we get a headline, but first of all a container maybe. And I happen to know that there is actually a Tailwind class with the name container, so we're going to use that. And what we also want initially is like margin auto for the sites for it to be centered when having a specific size, and this is what you can do with MX auto. Then what we do is creating the h1 and say Gary.rest. And when we save that, we notice that basically it's a very small h1. That's because I think, I'm not sure, but I think one of the concepts of Tailwind is that everything looks the same until you style it. Yeah. So what we're gonna do is, I think there's a class called text-xl or something like that. Let's just try it. So text-xl, does that change anything? Yeah, it does. And then you can add numbers in front of XL, for example, 5, which makes it bigger, which is cool, I guess. And then we want a subline, Gary as a service, for free. And that is a bit too close to h1, so we add margin top, and margin top is fortunately just empty, and then a number, so maybe margin top 2. Yeah, that looks okay. And next thing we want to have is another container with also a little bit of margin top, maybe like margin top for 5. Let's use 5. And in here we want the link, so basically href to the API. We will be using /API, and then it will simply say developer API /API, whatever. Also, that link doesn't have styling up front, so we want to use class name, and we want to make it bold, and I'm not sure if it's font minus bold or text minus bold. Sorry, underline, but I think that's not even text underline. I think that's just underline. Let's try it. Yeah, that works. But we still want to make it bold though. So we can use text minus bold. Nope. Then it's font minus bold. Yep. Okay. Besides that, we wanna maybe have all of that centered. So we use text minus center at the very outer wrapper. And then inside of, let me think. Let's just quickly jump over Kane.rest and check there. Yeah, so there's a refresh button. So maybe we also want to have a refresh button on the right side and a link on the left side, which is kind of like doable with a display flex. And below that, a quote. Okay, we can do that. So switching to localhost 3000 and making the container which contains the link and now soon a button, a flex container, which is doable by flex. And then we add a button. So button type button. And then it says refresh. But now the button is right next to the link. So I need a possibility of simply using space between. It's not space around, it's space between. Ah, okay. Space between. But that's a different space between than the one I'm searching. That's actually like literal space between stuff. What I want is flex something space between. Flex to, oh, I think it's justify. Justify content. And then, yeah, justify between. So we can use that one. So we jump over to our container and provide it with justify between. And then we need to switch to our page. And then you can actually see button on the right side, a link on the left side, but it's way too big. Like it's we have to make it more narrow. So let's check the Tailwind documentation for max width. Okay, and then there's, for example, max width MD. Maybe that's working fine. Let's see. So the whole container has max width MD. Yeah, I think that's okay. Maybe we can even work with max width SM. Yeah, should be alright, right? And I want a little bit more margin here. And also margin at the very top container. So margin 8. Yeah. Okay, so what's missing is the container that actually contains a quote. And we want to use the pre-tag such that we have proper formatting. And then we create a variable, random quote, which actually contains an object which says, hey, I am a quote. And then we stringify that object. So quote JSON string is JSON stringify random quote, comma null, comma 2 for having a little bit better, formatting. And then we'll put that right between the pre-tag. Okay, now that looks odd because it's also centered. So what we want here is maybe just text left. And what we also want is to have a little bit of styling like background and border radius and whatnot. So we switch back to the browser and check these properties. Border radius is probably just like, I don't know, a rounded border. Rounding corners, rounded corners, rounded. Rounded sounds good. So we'll give it rounded. I'll do that like meanwhile. And what we also want is background color. Oh, you can even use like rounded minus MD and so on and so forth. We want background color. Background, does it have, maybe just click on background size and it will maybe lead me to background color. Ah, backgrounds. I see it. So for example, we can use BG Slate 600 or so. Yeah, let's try that. So rounded and BG Slate 600. Okay. And now text white maybe. Yeah. But now we need a little bit of padding, and since margin is M something, probably padding is P minus 5. Yeah. Doesn't look too good, doesn't look too bad. Yeah, I think that's okay for now. Now that I'm seeing it, maybe we just use max width MD instead of max width SM. Yeah, that gives it a little bit more room. Okay, and maybe we can even make the corners be a bit more rounded, rounded LG. Yeah. Okay. Also on this one, we want a little bit of margin. Maybe MT4. And there we go. We actually have our setup, right? All right. So since we have the design now, the next thing we want to do is that when you click on the API link, it will actually show a random quote, or basically the hard-coded quote. So yeah, there's one more thing we need to do, which is actually using the link component from Next.js, because Next.js expects the link component to be used instead of the A element, and that's because it will do some magic behind the curtains. Okay, import link from next/link, and then simply wrap the existing A tag with link and the href, which is /API. And then you can remove the href from the A tag because Next.js will add it, right? And then the next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that when we click the API, that it actually provides us with a random quote, right? So how can we do that? In Next.js, there's a directory called API, and you see a file hello.js, and we can simply rename that file to index.js. And now if you access /API, it will output what's provided here, which is John Doe. And this is the point where we want to add the actual quote. And the quote is coming from a database later. So we want to create a new directory. Let's just call it util. And in this directory, we create a file, get or fetch, whatever, random quote. And as part of that file, we're exporting get random quote function. And that's going to be an async function. But for now, it's enough to simply return a hard-coded quote. Hey, I am a quote. Right, something like that. And with as a part of the API, we also need to make sure that export default async function uses the get random quote. So random quote is awaiting the get random quote. I'm not sure why it doesn't auto import it, so we'll simply do it. Import get random quote from util get random quote. Perfect. And now we can call get random quote, and we will use the result of that as part of our API. And now when we call it, we are seeing that hard-coded quote. And that's perfect because we can use the exact same function, get a random quote, here in our page. And that's cool because there is a function that you can export as part of your page file, which is export async function, and then get server side props. And Next.js will call that function when it's being requested on the server side. The result of that is basically an object which contains a key props, which then contains stuff that is being provided to the component. We'll see how that works. So first thing we want to do, maybe it works here. Yeah, we want to import get random quote, and then we want to fetch the quote. So quote is equal to await get random quote. And then we simply want to provide that quote to the props. And when it's being provided to the props, it's being provided here in the props, same as in React. And then you can simply read it via destructuring. And now if we reload the page, yeah, I think it's already working, is it? Yeah, sure thing. So oh, no, we're overriding it. I was confused. We were writing the same text. Okay, hey, I'm quote 123 maybe. And then we will use the quote and stringify it. And remove the random quote. Yeah, and now if we reload, we're getting it from that function. Perfect. All right, so from a perspective from Next.js, we're basically kind of done. So what we want to do maybe is git add and git commit all of this. Even more cool stuff. And then push it. And then Vercel will, if all goes well, auto-deploy it. But most importantly, we want to use and connect Supabase now. So let's jump over to the browser and go and create a new project on Supabase. Name's gonna be Gary Rest. And the database password is something like really long. Yeah, like this. And we're going to be hosting in maybe Ireland, and create new project. And then it's gonna take maybe like a few minutes, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, I don't know, until everything's set up. But what you get from the very beginning is your keys. And this is something that we can already work with. So there's the anonymous key, which is completely safe to share here in this video, and the URL. And we wanna provide those values within our project structure. So we create a new file .env.local, and then you can write next underscore public, and then for example, like, I don't know, key, and then you can just, oh, that's the URL, and we just write next public URL and next underscore public and then key. All right, perfect. And then we restart the development server with npm run dev. Where's our function? Right, so as part of the get random quote function, we want to read the key and the URL because we need to use it to initialize Supabase. And we get that via process.env. So you can destructure it with next public URL and next public key with process.env. Then let's just simply add it to the object to see that it's being properly processed. The key and the URL. And let's see the output. Yeah, so those are being read properly. Let's remove it from the object again and instead initialize Supabase, which, by the way, seems to have initialized. Right, so before we can initialize Supabase, we obviously need to install Supabase by calling, I have it somewhere, add Supabase /Supabase.js, and we'll wait for that to be finished. Yeah, now that's done. And what we want to do now is basically create a client. So you can say client equals create client from Supabase. And that one takes the key and the URL, but I have to look it up. So let's switch to the browser and go like Supabase.js. Yeah, client. It is first the URL, then the key. Okay, I can do that. So it takes the public URL, which we have, and the key. And instead of client, we will call this simply Supabase. Right. All right. Before we can fetch any kind of data, we obviously need to create data and create a database. Well, the database is available, but we don't have any tables. So we switch to the browser go to Supabase and go to table editor. And as part of the table editor, we will then click on new table and we will call it quotes. And the quotes table will simply have an ID and a column named quote. And this is a text field. What we also want to do is adding 3 rows. Hello 1. One more row. Hello 2. And the third one is not going to be hello 3, but hello Fubor. Hello Fubor. Right. And now, as this table exists, what you can do is you can fetch from that table. So let's switch to the code and let's say simply, I don't know, rows equals Supabase from, and then you provide the table name, which is quotes, and then you say what you want to select. So which is the actual columns. So, and we only want to have the column quote. And all of this is obviously asynchronous. So yeah, we'll await it. And then we can simply maybe attach it to the object once again and see what happens. Okay, let's save that. Let's run npm run dev. And let's see how it turns out to work or not to work. Okay, seems to be running successfully. And what we get is basically a object that contains a data property which contains our database entries. That was pretty much easy. Let's start off with only returning one by simply just accessing the first one. So we'll start off with a very trivial thing like row equals rows dot data index 0. So, and then at the end of the day, we can simply return row. Refresh, and we get the first quote. Now what we want is a random quote. So the problem is, as far as I know, Supabase in its abstraction currently doesn't support something like .random in the selection. You could use SQL functions for that and then call supabase.rpc. But yeah, I think for the amount of data that we're processing here, it's also quite okay if we just load, I don't know, 100 rows and then we filter it in here in Next.js. So that's what we can do. So we get the length, which is rows.data.length. And then we get the max index, which is essentially always length -1. I'm aware of the fact that it could be 0 and then it could turn out to be -1 now, but that's something we don't want to care about right now. And then one of the things that should be easy to do is finding a random index, and that is math.random times maximum index. So it's somewhere in between 0 and the maximum. And for it to be an integer, it needs to be rounded, obviously. So, and then at the end of the day, the row is given by the random index. Let's see if that works. Yep, I'll get the hello 2, I'll get the hello 1. Maybe at some point of time I'll get the hello foobar. But yeah, I guess I'm getting it. That's cool. Okay, so we have the get random quote function or get random quote function, which is already loading data from the database, from Supabase. Now, problem is we don't have row level security enabled, which in theory is a security problem. So let's enable row level security. We go to auth and we go to policies and enable row level security. And now it's enabled. And now let's see what happens. I refresh and I get a little bit of error. Sorry, you probably haven't seen how I was accessing the row level security because I wasn't sharing the whole screen. But you simply go to auth policies and then you see your table and then you enable it. And the problem that we're now getting an error is due to the fact that we're accessing stuff that we are not getting, essentially. And that's because there is no access at all to the tables right now, other than basically returning 0 rows. So you have no access of selecting any kind of rows, simply because that's how row level security works. And to overcome this, you would go into Supabase and then you would add a new policy on your table. And we can simply say selection always allowed. This is just a description. And then we basically click select here and we say, for example, I think I can just use true. And this will always turn out to be true, obviously. That seems to have worked. So let's switch to localhost, reload. Yeah, and now the selection works again. And this is essentially what you want to do for all of your tables, enable row level security, because it restricts access other than explicitly allowed. And that's a really cool thing in Supabase because you can connect it to auth and then you can actually allow only specific users to have specific access to specific tables and so on and so forth. Yeah. Phew. Okay. So, the service is working, which is kind of nice. And the thing that I will have to do later is provide the key and the URL to the environment variables on Vercel, which you can do in their UI. And then I'm going to maybe add a little bit more styling here and there, and also make the refresh button work. But other than that, I hope you learned how to use Next.js with Tailwind and Supabase. See you next time.